Nonsense hysteria in relation to climate destruction. Excerpt from the 727th Official Report of Conversation of December 11, 2019, translated with deepl.com, source,
Sonderzahl
4, page 2-4.
It must be said that the climate destruction taking place on Earth is a fact, undeniable and not simply of natural origin, so that it cannot be explained by the fact that it is a process that occurs completely naturally in the course of time, the planet and the Earth in the course of the changing ages of the Earth, as it did in the Anthropocene. This does not correspond to the truth, because very exact and centuries of plejaric observations, research and clarifications show without a doubt that the ongoing climate destruction does not correspond to a natural climate change, but to a destructive process artificially caused by terrestrial humanity. And if this is not stopped in the course of time, then a climate collapse is threatening, to which a large part of humanity will fall victim. The blame for the whole beginning of the climate disaster arose first from the period of the First World War from 1756 to 1763, and then further from the resulting industrialization, as then further from the two world wars. Then mankind constantly increased in tremendous masses, and just the inevitable overpopulation came up. And through this their needs for life and luxury as well as their procurement rose rapidly and in heights, which could only be brought or produced by destruction and extermination in nature, its fauna and flora, and in practically all ecosystems as well as on the planet itself. This has been the case until today and will continue to be the case if the earthlings do not finally discard their stupidity and self-importance and find the way to reason and understanding, and thus to the realization that they must stop all degenerate, destructive, devastating and eradicating machinations on the planet and all ecosystems. But this is only possible through a quick and comprehensive reduction of humanity, namely through a long-lasting and effective birth stop and a strict birth control that follows. The spreading of the thousand-fold and all-poisoning toxins into the entire environment must also stop everywhere. This is because since they were released into nature and into the atmosphere, the vapors of these toxins have been released into the atmosphere, where they fuse and react with each other, creating new toxic gases that are extremely harmful to health and cause organic damage, such as mainly human cancers, resulting in much suffering, pain and death. However, this is only part of the whole, because the destruction of the world's ecosystems, nature and the planet, as well as the atmosphere, has provoked the destruction of the climate, whereby CO2 and other greenhouse gases, such as nitrous oxide and methane gas, etc., also play a major role in the destruction of the climate, through the likewise irresponsible worldwide and still continuing destruction of the environment in many respects, including the plasticization of the seas, lakes, rivers, streams, all landscapes, moors, steppes and even deserts, forests, rainforests, primeval forests and the mountains, as well as their buildings of all kinds and the overall associated heat development. In many ways, climate destruction has developed over time, and if this is not counteracted, which is only possible through a reduction of humanity, namely through a long-term birth stop and a subsequent exact birth control, then a climate collapse will be inevitable. Climate destruction has resulted in the disruption and destruction of the specific abiotic and biotic factors of the habitats in which the many species of all genera and species lived at a certain stage of their life cycle. But the enormous overpopulation and its needs, which have been and continue to be met for the satisfaction of humanity through destructive, devastating, exterminating and irresponsible machinations, have not only provoked and brought about climate destruction, but also the climate destruction that is now prevailing. And it is a fact that with every new birth of an earthling the needs for its livelihood increase more and more, whereby all around all destruction, annihilation and extermination, and with it also the destruction of the climate, continues to advance. If the entirety of all causes of the disaster of environmental and climate destruction is analyzed in detail, it is recognized that only the ecological and planetary destructive machinations carried out by the overpopulation have led to the climate catastrophe. This was done by undermining the earth, or by tremendous robbing of the earth, namely by vast amounts of resource exploitation, which was and will continue to be oriented towards natural gas, peat, ores of all kinds, rare earths, precious metals, petroleum and coal, and this for the necessary needs for the life support of the horrendously increasing humanity. Overpopulation, as well as for its satisfaction and greed in relation to luxury goods of everyone in relation. And within this framework, everything will continue in the future as well, until a climate collapse becomes unavoidable. If not in the foreseeable future, a worldwide birth stop of several years will be enforced, and then a worldwide birth control will not be carried out in order to bring the earthly humanity to a planetary level of a reasonable population. Well, even if now an ongoing climate destruction brings much disaster, suffering, death and destruction, as well as annihilation and extermination over the world and the entire overpopulation mankind, like increased volcanic eruptions, natural disasters, earthquakes, seaquakes, primeval storms, tremendous and hardly containable forest fires of all kinds and other fire disasters, life goes on. And this will remain so, even if the already precarious melting of the glaciers and ice masses of the South and North Pole continues unstoppably from now on, changing the Gulf Stream in the Atlantic and the planetary circulation, and thus also the jet streams. The planetary circulation corresponds to the global wind system, which is related to solar radiation and produces an uneven distribution. The planetary circulation, Svath taught me, is the westerly winds of the mid-latitudes or the trade winds of the tropical regions, which form important medial links and similarities. Through all their functions, effects and impacts, the climate continues to change and warm up, causing the glaciers and the poles to melt, causing the oceans to rise, flooding and sweeping away large areas of land. But there is no reason for hysteria, because nature cannot degenerate more than simply to the maximum possible extent with regard to climate destruction, precisely until the maximum possible is reached. And this is also then so, when the destruction of the climate will inevitably not stop its progress and will not be stopped until earthliness finally finds its way to reason and drastically reduces its mass, and therefore also little by little all its destructive, annihilating and eradicating machinations on the planet, on all worldwide ecosystems as well as the atmosphere and the climate. However, this can only be the case if the births are stopped for many years and a subsequent birth control is carried out. Good articles are written, but they usually sparingly avoid addressing the real problem, which is that the whole disaster is the fault of the overpopulation. If the huge mass of terrestrial humanity were not, then there would be nothing to worry about from all the worldwide climate problems and from all the destruction, annihilation and extermination etc. What the little naive Greta Thunberg caused with her one-person demonstration in Sweden, which was controlled from somewhere unscrupulously, and their
Fridays for Future
movement that developed from it, would not have to be talked about, nor would it be necessary to sing her unjustified and unreasonable praise. The same must be said, however, about the 25-year-old German climate activist Louisa Marie Neubauer, because she too, like Greta Thunberg, is pushing the climate problem up in a way that is out of touch with reality and causes, thereby promoting the unjustified climate hysteria that is heating up all the mad climate demonstration freaks and causing them to roar around the world in fear and hysteria. If we look at all the consequences of climate hysteria, then we can identify specific individual factors, especially those irresponsible political parties, explicitly those, and also those governments, which have taken the whole of climate hysteria and continue to do so in order to raise their voices and make themselves important. And that these irresponsible and unrighteous people who are incapable of government, with the exclusion of all righteous governments and party members of course, in addition to this, they are thinking up nonsensical and largely useless climate protection measures, into which millions of sums of money are to be buttered, which are being taken out of the pockets of the people by crazy new taxes, is probably more than exploitation. And, moreover, action in this regard is the best way to achieve an immense and constantly rising price increase for all the goods needed to sustain life. As a result, all the populations of those states will find it increasingly difficult to make a living from state exploitation. This, together with the fact that many people fall into poverty as a result of this kind of state-ordered financial exploitation, and when it is seen that, while the misguided rulers, who with their nonsense bring about the whole of this unpleasant emergence, are themselves collecting more than just sufficient and excessive rewards and can live in joy and glory in financial carelessness, without having a guilty conscience, then the hats of many a distressed earthling are rightly raised.